A very good morning, children. Now, coming to the next topic of the chapter. Now, in the previous sections, we have seen how the demand is increasing and decreasing and how the supply is increasing and decreasing. Now, we are going to look into the topics where the demand and supply are perfectly elastic and inelastic, and what happens to the price and the quantity in those particular situations. Okay. Okay, now this is a situation where you have perfectly elastic supply curve and there are changes in demand. There is increase and decrease in demand. Fine. So as you can see here, children, there is a horizontal straight line, which means it is a perfectly elastic supply curve. And we know that in a perfectly elastic supply curve, the price remains constant. And with this particular price, we can supply whatever quantity we wish to. Okay, so here this is the original demand curve D, and when it is intersecting with supply curve, this becomes your equilibrium point. Then when the demand is increasing, okay, so definitely your equilibrium point is also changing from EO to E2, and your quantity is increasing. Then when the demand is coming backwards, your equilibrium point again changes from EO to E1. The price remains constant, the equilibrium price is constant, but then your equilibrium quantity is again changing. Okay, so in this situation you have to remember that when the supply is perfectly elastic and the demand is increasing and decreasing, your price is constant but your equilibrium quantity is changing. Okay, so why price remains unaffected when supply curve is perfectly elastic and demand curve shifts? So perfectly elastic supply means a situation of infinite supply. If demand curve shifts to the right, there does not rise a situation of excess demand, because at the same price, the supply is infinite. Okay, so if the demand is shifting to the right, it does not mean there is excess demand, children, but it means that at the same price the supply is also increasing, the supply is also becoming infinite. Okay, so price remains constant. If there is decrease in demand, there is no question of fall in price, because even the slightest fall in price would mean zero supply in a situation of perfectly elastic supply curve. Okay, we have seen these situations even when we were doing elasticity of demand and supply. So the same things are related here. So here, when the demand is increasing and decreasing, the equilibrium points are changing, your equilibrium quantities are changing, but the price is remaining constant. Fine. Now, when there is perfectly inelastic supply curve and your demand is increasing and decreasing, so when the demand is, moving from D to D1, okay, the price is also increasing and your equilibrium point is changing. Then when the demand is moving from DO to D2, again, your price is decreasing, okay, and your equilibrium point is also changing, because at this particular point, your supply and demand curve are intersecting. So when the demand curve is changing, your supply being, constant, that is inelastic, only your equilibrium points are changing. Okay, and your equilibrium prices are changing, but your equilibrium quantity is remaining constant. So you have to remember in this that when there is perfectly inelastic supply curve and there is increase and decrease in demand, there would be increase and decrease in equilibrium price, but your equilibrium quantity is not going to change. Okay, why quantity remains unaffected when supply curve is perfectly inelastic and demand curve shifts? We know perfectly inelastic supply is a situation of no change in supply, no matter what the price is, correct? So when the demand curve is shifting to right and to the left, supply remains unaffected. Okay. Then the next situation where you're perfectly, now we are going to see a situation where your demand is perfectly elastic and inelastic. Okay, now coming to perfectly elastic demand curve and changes in supply, where there is increase and decrease in supply. So this is a horizontal straight line, or your perfectly elastic demand curve, and then your supply curves are changing. So when the supply is changing from SO to S1, it is moving forward. Okay, so that means your equilibrium quantity is also changing, but again, the price is remaining constant. And when the supply curve is moving from SO to S2, it's moving backwards. Your equilibrium quantity is also changing, but your price is remaining constant. Okay. So why price remains unaffected when demand curve is perfectly elastic and supply curve shifts? Price perfectly elastic demand means a situation of infinite demand. If supply curve shifts to the right or to the left, price remains constant. Slightest increase in price would mean zero demand in a situation of perfectly elastic demand curve. We have seen this in price elasticity of demand, okay? Likewise, forward shift in supply does not cause fall in price, but demand remains infinite, okay? Now comes a situation where there is perfectly inelastic demand curve and there are changes in supply. Okay, there is increase in supply and there is decrease in supply. So when the supply is increasing, okay, a situation of increase in supply, when demand is perfectly inelastic, equilibrium price reduces from P to P2, okay, from PO to P2. Now, children, here, okay, it is opposite of demand. When the supply curve is down, that means the supply is increasing, okay. So when the supply increases, the price decreases. And when the supply is decreasing from SO to S1, the price is increasing, okay. So this is a situation of perfectly inelastic demand curve. So a situation of decrease in supply, when demand is perfectly inelastic, equilibrium price will increase and equilibrium quantity remains constant. Okay, so why quantity remains unaffected when demand curve is perfectly inelastic and supply curve shifts? We know in perfectly inelastic demand curve, demand remains constant. Therefore, when supply curve shifts to the right or to the left, demand remains constant. Rise or fall in price does not cause any extension or contraction of demand. So here, when the price is increasing and decreasing, it's not causing any extension or contraction of demand. Okay, here the change is only with the supply and the price, and the demand is, the same. Fine. So the four situations, children, where your demand is perfectly elastic, inelastic, and your supply is perfectly elastic and inelastic. Please go through all the diagrams properly, and if at all you have any doubts, you can always ask. This is it for this class, children. Thank you.